Greetings to you wherever you may be, and welcome to our discussion about material narratology. My name is Rabea, and I work as a tenure-track professor in medieval German studies at the University of Vienna. I'm also the principal investigator of a project titled Material Narratology, Rhythm and Voice in the Fora manuscript 276, which provides the context for our discussion today.
Hello, my name is Elisabeth König, and I'm currently working on a PhD thesis focusing on the category voice within this project.
And my name is Helene IGEL, and I am writing a corresponding PhD thesis about the category of rhythm.
Our talk today will be divided into three parts. Firstly, I will introduce you to the concept of material narratology and the so-called Fora manuscript.
Afterwards, I will demonstrate how the rhythm of narrativity can aid us in better describing the compiled nature of medieval manuscripts.
And lastly, I will delve a bit deeper into the visual dimensions of rhythm.
The literary texts we read and work with every day shape our understanding of literature in general, and thus also the tools we create to describe and understand those works of art. Probably the most famous example is Genette's influential Discours du récit, which he wrote with Proust à la recherche du temps perdu in mind. As most narratologists have focused on modern literature, especially 19th century novels, some medievalists therefore dismiss classic narratology as a toolkit for pre-modern narratives. However, the majority leans towards the need for adapting narratological terms and concepts to objects that are historically more remote. Some experts even propose that the study of pre-modern literature can contribute important ideas to how we think about storytelling and shape our professional tools to better understand how narratives work. In this sense, it has always been a bit strange to me how little attention narratology gives to the material side of literature. Medievalists, on the other hand, have always been a bit obsessed with the treasure trove of the physical book. Probably because each medieval book is written by hand and therefore an economic and artistic project in its own right, we are keenly attuned to the material side of literature. In medieval German manuscripts, we don't find the familiar paratextual elements we see in modern books, such as mentions of the author or genre. Therefore, we must rely on various cues derived directly from the physical characteristics of the manuscripts to understand how our texts were judged and read. The dimensions and quality of the parchment, the effort put into page layout, and the choice of ink and colors all provide insights into the significance assigned to these texts. One characteristic of medieval text transmission is its inclination to compile various works within a single book. Even though there are modern text collections of short stories or poems, this is not the most common format for modern books. However, in the Middle Ages, even longer texts like novels typically did not exist in isolation. Instead, they were often combined with other texts, whether similar or completely different in nature. Comprehending the coexistence of works within the same book and their arrangement offers us valuable insights not only into the personal inclinations of those who commissioned and authored the book, but also into medieval notions of fictionality, genre, and narration. In our project, our goal is to bring this implicit knowledge to light. We're curious about how narratological models can enhance our understanding of compilations and how the materiality of medieval text transmission can refine the accuracy of narratological tools, especially when applied to historically distant items. An ideal object to apply this idea is the Fora manuscript 276. It was written in the second half of the 12th century in the early days of the monastery Forau, which is located in central Austria and belongs to the order of the Augustine canons. The manuscript carries so much weight in medieval German studies that it is known as just the Fora manuscript. This is partly due to the fact that many of the literary works it contains are exclusive to this manuscript. Furthermore, these works are connected by shared interests in world history and personal salvation. They are also carefully arranged. Indeed, the Fora manuscript is not just a container for different works of art, it is a work of art in its own right, and that on more than one level. In this picture, every colored stripe corresponds to a text with the width of the stripe indicating its length. The first and the last text clearly dominate the others in this regard. The last one is the Latin Gesta Friderici, a contemporary account of Frederick Barbarossa's deeds by his uncle Otto of Freising. The second substantial work is also a chronicle, the Kaiserchronik, which actually pioneers this genre in the German vernacular. Nestled between these two is an array of biblical narratives in a loose chronological sequence beginning with a retelling of the books of Moses. In between these biblical narratives, we find briefer texts that focus on a systematic exploration of theological subjects, like the very short Gebet einer Frau, just at the very end of the German part. As mentioned before, these texts, which vary greatly in terms of language, length, form, origin, and genre, are connected by shared thematic interests. But what we are curious about now is how these texts behave differently when read together in their interaction compared to when they are observed in isolation within their modern editions. One aspect we turn to in our project is the rhythm, resulting from combining narrative with non-narrative texts. With Gerald Price, we understand narrativity as a gradual feature of texts. There is much more in narratives than narrative, and many primary non-narrative works show narrative passages or features. The more narrative texts are marked blue in the figure, the more systematic texts in yellow. And though simplified, this binary coloring scheme proves valuable in revealing a discernible rhythm between narrative and explanatory pieces, which could be described as a recurring structure and, simultaneously, a mirroring along the central axis. This alternation of telling and explaining is of particular interest for medieval literature, since narrative works of this period are on the whole much more permeated by explanatory passages, digressions, and descriptions than is the case for modern novels. Exploring these phenomena promises intriguing insights into medieval concepts of narrativity and storytelling. Narratologists like Beatrice Ibanez and David Rudrum have already demonstrated that narrativity is a highly culturally specific category, yet systematic analyses of medieval literature are still pending. The Forum manuscript therefore presents an excellent chance to connect the narrative micro-rhythm of the individual texts with the macro-rhythm of the entire compilation. In just a moment, Lizzie will share a compelling illustration of this. Yet, what captivates our attention equally, and Helen will elaborate on this afterwards, is whether the manuscript displays an inclination towards highlighting this rhythm or forming alternative rhythms in physical layout, visual appearance, and tactile qualities. With this, I hand it over to Lizzie.
Thank you very much, Rabia. So we will start with an example of semantic and narrative rhythm in the Fora manuscript 276. What we can see here is the beginning of the Fora books of Moses, a set of texts that paraphrase, retell, and elaborate mainly the book of Genesis. This special interest in expanding and retelling biblical material is a decisive feature of biblical narrative, which first appeared in German vernacular in the 9th century. There, the interaction of narrativity and non-narrativity comes into play. Biblical texts give the plot, but the recipients were not only interested in the fact that man was created, but also how he was created. And so these texts start to give answers in a descriptive, non-narrative way. One particularly amusing passage is a discussion of the function of the fingers. And let me tell you, not too much has changed in the last 900 years, not even in the meaning of the middle finger. Through these descriptive texts, non-narrativity comes into a narrative text. The audience, but also political or spiritual interests, scientific knowledge, and what we would call daily politics finds entry into the texts. But back to our manuscript. The design of the page already shows that the text is divided by red and blue Lombardy capitals into sections that rhythmize and somehow break up the reading process. Interestingly, these visual rhythms have not been adopted in full in the edition, here by Diemer. The initial is a different one. the Lombardic capitals have been marked in a way hard to distinguish from the rest of the text. The line division is taken over from the manuscript, yet the reading rhythm changes quite involuntarily. So today's readers of the edition don't even have the chance of equal starting conditions. Apart from this material and visual rhythm, there are particularly interesting passages in the 4 books of Moses that exemplify the alternation of narrativity and non-narrativity and thus reveal a rhythmic change in speech posture. The narrative parts are given by the canonical text of the Bible, and in between, non-narrative sections are inserted to interpret the biblical texts and make them fruitful for spiritual life. These interpolations not only differ from the narrative passages in terms of content, they also have introductions, endings, and very interesting different tenses. What Harald Weinrich described in his book Tempus can also be observed here. The present tense is used as the most frequent of the discussing tenses, whereas the past tense dominates in every kind of narrative. These narratorial rhythms are inserted into the courses of the biblical action, so the combination of linguistic and semantic aspects clearly show that we can talk of narrator's digression, as Sandra Linden puts it. Let us keep this in mind and take a look at the blessing of Jacob. The term blessing of Jacob refers to a passage near the end of the book of Genesis in which the Israelite patriarch Jacob predicts to his sons what will become of them and their lineage. Graphically, the following picture emerges for the blessing of Jacob in the alternation of narrative and non-narrative sections, which you can see here following their order in the text from top to bottom in different colors. It shows that our text is a biblical paraphrase with didactic inserts, which not only structure the text as such, but also expose the readers and also the listeners to rhythmic alternation of biblical text, interpretation, and meditation. The biblical plot is the starting point that could be assumed to be well known by all contemporary recipients of the text, and is the basis for digressions in the non-narrative sections. If we now look at the proportion of non-narrative segments, it becomes very obvious that there is a great interest in non-narrative sections with didactic demands on the part of the recipients or the commissioners. From this, we also clearly see that both text and recipients experience a rhythmization through the tempus used in the various sections. With regard to tempus, it's compelling. The parts that retell or paraphrase the book of Genesis, that is, tell the story, here the green parts, are all in the past tense. On the other hand, the parts in which the narrator speaks, give didaxis, edification, and notes on Christian living are all in the present tense, here the yellow ones, and include audience addresses, prayers, doxologies, and exclamations. It is striking that all texts in the Forum manuscript experience a crucial rhythmization through those non-narrative inserts. From now on, they will never be as they were before, as it's a totally different rhythm they gain and they convey. Like this, an analysis of the narrative and non-narrative parts of the manuscript may not be able to give an answer to the question whether the manuscript was bound together arbitrarily or on purpose, which, in my opinion, absolutely no one can prove on solid ground. But even better, it can reveal patterns and rhythms within the manuscript, flowing in some places, faltering in others, and in this way make it an image of the rhythms of life in the Middle Ages, as Jean-Claude Schmitt puts it. These rhythms are reflected not only in the content of the texts, but also within its originating environment, the monastic world, and its own peculiar rhythms. By bringing together the inner and the outer, the spatio-temporal rhythm and the rhythm of life, this manuscript can tell us many things, and this includes the material as well as the content, one conditional on the other. And with this, I hand over to Helen.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. I would like to draw your attention now to a text that is special both in terms of content and its placement in the manuscript. We will be taking a closer look at the end of the German part of the manuscript. As you can see here, The German fascicle ends with a short spiritual text, so-called Gebet einer Frau or Prayer of a Woman. In this text, a poor sinner seeks consolation and forgiveness, invoking Christ, Mary, and Saint Michael. It is a non-narrative text following a lamentation of sins. This fascinating text abruptly ends in the middle of the verse, so unfortunately the text remains fragmentary, making it only one manuscript page long. A new fascicle begins with an almost blank page containing only the scribe's note, and following that, the last programmatic narrative Latin text, the Gesta Frideriki, a historical retelling, begins. The transition of fascicles involves changes on various levels. Visually, there is a break in the layout, as the first page of the new fascicle is not filled with a two-column text. Additionally, the initial style and coloration of the markup strategy change, and the degree of handwriting completion differs. At a semantic level, there is a transition from a non-narrative spiritual text, a lamentation of sins, to an extensive contemporary historical narrative. And this signifies a change in textual genre, also a shift in narrativity, from a programmatic spiritual to a narrative historiographical text. I suggest understanding changes like these as shifts in rhythm or rhythm disturbances in medieval manuscripts. The visual layout with two columns and variously complex initial and Lombardic stages impressively structures the material and creates visual rhythms, separating texts or emphasizing important passages. Visual rhythm involves expected structuring and also striking breaks within the markings. And this could be summarized as Benveniste and Lefebvre wrote about repetition, resumptions, variants, stagnations, or ruptures. Breaks play a significant role in perceiving rhythms, so rhythmic elements in handwriting need to be defined for further examination. One approach is using methodical considerations derived from eye-tracking studies to define so-called areas of interest and also study the viewer's focus. This strategy can also be relevant for understanding rhythms in visual markings in handwriting. In the Vorwahl manuscript, I focus on the layout, the fonts and markings, including color and complexity as important visual elements. As you can see here, I have highlighted these areas of interest on the page with the Gebet einer Frau. The layout of the manuscript is mostly consistent with 2 columns per page. The script is also uniform, likely written by 2 main scribes, one for the German and one for the Latin part. In the Gebet einer Frau, Lombardic initials are used to highlight specific words, clarifying the main semantic idea of this text. So, the Gebet einer Frau is a lamentation of sin, seeking comfort, forgiveness, and salvation from God. The markings in the text reflect this program, emphasizing the woman's desire to work on her relationship with God. It starts with a very large 2-colored complex G initial, serving as the first invocation to God. The following 4 single-color Lombards emphasize the woman's direct address to God and her request for consolation. So as you can see here, first the very large God G initial, then Ich for I, Du for you, Trost for consolation, and Gott for God. So these words outline the main idea and the theme of the text fragment. On the transmitted page, a regular color pattern is evident. The surviving page shows a regular change from red to blue, which you can also see here. And although the specific color may not have symbolic meaning, the highlighting of these central words seems intentional for semantic emphasis. So, as one continues to read and examine this manuscript, the color scheme of red and blue becomes more prominent. This is because on the next page, the color repertoire expands and the initial style changes in the Gester section with the addition of green, which you can see here. The visual marking strategies of both fascicles differ in color and in style. Red headings are mainly found in the Latin fascicle, while the German fascicle shows some incomplete production appearing to stagnate with a few exceptions. So, for example, the blank line in the Gebet einer Frau, which is highlighted here, suggests a missing red heading, which is present in the Gester following the huge F initial, as you can see in the given example. This indicates that the Gester is more advanced in production than the German fascicle with the Gebet einer Frau. Upon close examination of this passage in the manuscript, several rhythms and disturbances can be identified. The layout experiences brief interruptions, coloration changes, and the style of initials also varies. It is evident that the Gester was likely produced or rubricated before the German part, which is a significant discovery for researchers trying to determine the connection between these two parts. So, although there are obvious differences, there are nevertheless recognizable similarities within the concept of the two parts, which create a connection. Though the manuscript rhythmic elements like initials are present and structure all the texts, though their strategies may differ at times. Even when rhythmic elements are missing, such as missing headlines, we can see that they were intended to be there, which means rhythm is also noticeable when it's only hinted at. So, to sum up my main points. Rhythms can be observed and studied in medieval manuscripts on various levels. Rhythm goes beyond a visual level. It involves the interweaving of visual, performative, and semantic aspects for a comprehensive analysis. For example, performative rhythms refer to the spatio-temporal dimensions of reading, viewing, and processing, also including turning pages. And semantic rhythms involve interactions between narrative and non-narrative texts, combining, repeating, or varying genres. So, analyzing different rhythms reveals the importance of repetition, variance, stagnation, and rupture in medieval manuscripts, highlighting their relevance in terms of narratology and in terms of material aspects.
Thank you so much for granting us your time and attention. The idea of material narratology opens up a lot of avenues for exploration, and we have just completed the first year of the project, with 3 more years ahead of us. As such, we are very grateful for any ideas, suggestions, and corrections, and look forward to exchange with you all. Thanks again, and see you in Monopoly.